whole interview. What do you think?
Makes sense.
Okay, so let me then introduce the event quickly. So welcome everybody. So thank you for participating in this event. This is a core event for the Knowledge and Innovation Interest Group, and it is the Foundation's Scholar interview. So this is an interview that we have with a scholar who has been impactful for our community, who has been key in shaping a field or a subfield of our community. And the scholar will be interviewed by two younger but professionally younger only scholars who are moving their initial steps into our community. Now, before we start, let me give you a very brief overview, a little background of what this is about and how this all started, how this tradition of the Foundational Scholar interview started. So this was initiated in 2011 by Gabriel Sulansky. And the purpose, and actually this is the 10th anniversary this year. So the purpose of the interviews or the interview was and it is twofold. So on the one hand, we want to honor a scholar who has been foundational for our community. And on the other hand, what we want to do is to get to know the scholar better from a different perspective than the typical one of having a seminar or a lecture or a summary of the work of the scholar, which is by taking a journey into the scholar development since the beginning of her career. So this is basically the twofold purpose of this event. Now, let me just introduce, and I'm honored to do this, the Foundational Scholar of 2021 of the Knowledge and Innovation Interest Group, who is Professor Carliss Baldwin. So Carliss is the William White Professor of Business Administration at the Harvard Business School. And what you will see here is really a tour into Carliss's journey as a scholar. And so what we will get to know is the main milestones, the key turning points, and I hope also the sources of inspiration of Carliss. So what made Carliss what she is today for the community, so that we can learn how she became a reference point for our community. Now, I will not say much more than this about Carliss, as I anticipated also to her because of two reasons. So first, because this is the goal of the interview, to get to know her. And second, because I do not want to spoil the work of our amazing interviewers, so Navya Pandit and Constantin Prox. So what you will see today is the outcome of 6 months of work and interactions between Navya, Constantin, and Carliss. And what I want to do here is first to thank Carliss for the generosity with which she always answered the call for more information and interactions in order to build this incredible map that I've seen on screen. And second, I want to thank Navya and Constantin because they accepted with great enthusiasm the proposal and the challenge to do this. They did not know probably at the beginning what they were going to engage with, but I think so. I've seen always smiling faces, so this means that it was also a joy to do all this. Let me just introduce briefly who our two interviewers are. So Navya Pandit is a PhD student at Bocconi University. She has a background in biosciences and then a PhD. She's about to graduate, a PhD in management. And she studies, so consistent with her background, she studies issues on corporate strategy and sustainability. Constantin Prox is a PhD student at INSEAD. She has a background in economics and now management. So I studied, and he works on issues related to how firms develop competitive advantages and the organizational challenges that come with that. Having said this, I want to thank all the people who are attending here. As I typically say, this is our reward for the work that we put into this, and especially the reward to the three speakers here, so the scholar and the two interviewers. Having said this, so let me give the floor to Constantin and Navya for the introduction and for the interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Miriam, for that very kind introduction. So hello to everybody. I am Navya, and so Constantin and I are very happy to be here with you.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Constantin. Very excited to have this session with you.
Okay, so before we jump in, I would just like to introduce our sort of guest for today, which is Professor Carliss Baldwin. So Carliss, as Miriam pointed out, is a William L. White Professor of Business Administration at the Harvard Business School. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in economics from MIT in 1972, and she later went on to obtain her MBA and MBA and DBA from Harvard Business School. She was appointed as assistant professor at MIT, eventually moving on to Harvard Business School, where she got tenure and has sort of continued to serve since. She's a prolific researcher, as sort of everybody here knows, and she primarily studies the process of design and its impact on firm strategy, platforms, and sort of business ecosystems. Her many academic works, including her book, which is co-authored with Kim Clark, Design Rules Volume 1, The Power of Modularity, has influenced a lot of scholars in the field of technology and sort of innovation. Her influence is also evident from the several awards she has received. So she was named the Distinguished Scholar of the Technology and Innovation Management Division of the Academy of Management in 2015. She was also she has also been awarded a sort of doctorate from the TU Munich for her contributions to the fields of technology and management. Apart from researcher, Carliss is also a very accomplished and sort of a very accomplished teacher. So we all know this from the several classes that she's developed and taught for both of the undergrad and sort of MBA classes while at Harvard Business School. The list of Carliss's achievements is very, very long indeed. And sort of during this interview, we really hope to unpack some of the stories and insights that are sort of behind these many milestones that Carliss has sort of had during her very long and fruitful academic journey. So thank you so much, Carliss, for actually joining us today. Would you like to say hi sort of before we actually start the interview?
Hi, everyone. I see many friends, and thank you for coming. And I'm very honored and overwhelmed to be here. I want to thank Navya and Constantin for some absolutely wonderful conversations that we've had over the past 6 months, and conversations that have meant a lot to me. I do have one correction, which is I am the William L. White Professor of Business Administration Emerita. So there is, I think, another professor, another William L. White professor. And I am happily retired because I'm trying to finish Design Rules 2. And if I were teaching, it wouldn't happen. So thank you all, and hope we can have some time to chat at the end.
Awesome, thank you, Carliss. So as Carliss also just mentioned, right now, Navya and I had the chance to talk with Carliss over the last couple of months, which was super rewarding for us, and I hope will help us a little bit in guiding you through her life through this interview, and maybe get some hopefully some useful advice for all of you listening right now. Before we begin, I think it's maybe helpful to first give a really brief overview of what we will cover today and actually make you aware of another resource that was briefly mentioned earlier that we have created for you and that you do have access to, which is that, so over the last couple of months, we went through all of Carliss's work and we actually summarized all of it in a neat little map, which I will actually also just show you right now. But which you can also find on the conference platform under files, so in the session under files. Don't worry, this slide is not for you to be able to read it right now, but I do want to use it maybe for a brief overview. First, just for your orientation, we have these two parts. The boxes up here contain summaries of all of Carliss's published works, and then to the bottom, we have an arrow with the people and events that were particularly central to Carliss's academic journey. The topics we're going to cover in the interview today are sort of going to relate to different parts of Carliss's journey and Carliss's career arc. And for those of you maybe less familiar with sort of all of her work, I want to give a really quick overview just using this map, in fact. So Carliss began her career in finance, mainly focused on real options and investments. From there, she a little later transitioned into technology and started collaborating with Tim Clark on modularity, and which importantly then included their now quite famous book, Design Rules 1. This shift to technology and writing Design Rules 1, I think, will be a very fascinating topic in what we're going to talk about later. So do look out for that. After the publication of Design Rules 1, Carliss shifted to a sort of actual whole host of topics in domains ranging from user-driven innovation, transactions, and a little more of modularity as well. Lastly, and very exciting, and as Carliss just mentioned, she's in the process of writing Design Rules 2 right now. So I hope we're going to also have a chance to talk a little bit about that later today. All right. Again, you can find that map in the files in case you want to read it sort of after the interview and dive more into the work of Carliss. Before we begin, just really quick housekeeping. Please obviously keep yourselves muted. If you have any questions, please do put them in the chat. Depending on time, at the end, we'll have a short Q&A session based on the questions you are going to put in the chat. All right, let's begin. Carliss.
Yes.
I think we would first like to start at the very beginning of your academic journey. You studied financial economics in graduate school, and both then your pre-tenure and immediate post-tenure work is primarily finance related in real options and irreversible investments. We know finding your contribution can be a little challenging, so we were wondering how you first approached that. How did you approach contributing to your field? And maybe based off that, do you have any advice for us young scholars out there on how to find our own contributions?
Yes, so I was fortunate to be present at the very beginning of option theory. I was an undergraduate at MIT, and Bob Merton was my undergraduate thesis advisor. I wrote my undergraduate thesis on convertible preferred stock for technical reasons. You can solve for their value, and that was. I didn't have a lot of maths, so that was important. But I was very struck by the fact that it seemed to me that, especially as in the years after my undergraduate period, when I was a doctoral student, as option theory exploded, it also seemed to me that everything had been done. In fact, so I went looking for something different, and I found, something where the assumptions of option theory didn't hold. And what I found was irreversibility and real options. So my doctoral thesis was on irreversible investments, and it was specifically meant to be a case where the assumptions that allow you to price options don't hold. So that was how I got into it. And irreversibility was sort of my brand for a long time. So
would you also sort of like to just talk about, so you're very in sort of finance at the moment. So sort of what happened at sort of the juncture when you sort of got tenure? So when you
okay, so when I became an assistant and then an associate professor, I tried to do real options, but I also tried to do modeling of interesting situations. And I was very much a, you got a project, I'll join. And so my contributions were sort of all over the map, although there was a theme of real options and irreversibility running through it. But I was struck by the fact that, back in those days, option theory was everywhere and there was a great deal of excitement. Real options were supposed to be the next new corporate thing. Just as financial options were taking over the financial world, real options would take over the corporate world. So I did a lot of pricing of real options, and I kept being struck by the fact that it was a lot of math, a lot of assumptions. Bob Merton once said to one of my co-authors, but I was there, about the assumptions behind the real options model. He says, well, you just make it up. And, so we would just make stuff up. But that was a little dissatisfying at some level. And then it struck me that here you were bringing in this horrendous mathematical apparatus and telling managers they should pay attention to it, but the assumptions that went into it, they didn't understand, and they didn't understand how the model worked either. And then when you brought them the results, maybe the real options would add 50% to the basic project value. If you're really lucky, 70%, but maybe 30%. And those percentages for a capital project are just sort of the noise. You expect that kind of imprecision. So I didn't think that my technology was adding a lot. So I went looking for a place where maybe the real options were bigger. And just after tenure, well, first of all, I got to tenure with a completely empty pipeline. I told people that I had a lot of projects underway, but the truth was I really didn't know where I was going to go. And I was increasingly unhappy with the work. Not unhappy, just it didn't strike me that any of my projects were going to have big effects. So around that time, just after tenure, Kim Clark approached me and wanted me to be a token, basically, in his group. He was setting up an interest group at the Harvard Business School, and he had funding and support from the dean, but it had to be a cross-unit effort. And Kim was head of the Technology and Operations Management Group, and there weren't any other people in that interest group from other units. So Kim came to me and he said, well, maybe you'll be interested. And it was sort of the right thing at the right time, because I was looking around for a site someplace where options mattered, and Kim was looking for a token from another unit to justify his project. So I started to make, so I was a very arrogant young scholar. I was trained in finance. didn't walk with a swagger, but I might as well have. You know, finance was it. Everybody else was wrong-headed, and maybe there was a little bit going on in strategy, but it was a new field. And if people just understood finance a little better, they would make better decisions. So I don't know why people put up with me, but I did start going to the TOM seminar. This was the day when there was a great deal of opposition because it was the time of the rise of Japan and Japanese manufacturing systems. Kim and his doctoral students and co-authors did a lot of work there. And there was a sense of, you know, the finance people in corporations were ruining operational investments because they would force everything into a strict financial straitjacket and do capital budgeting. And if the project didn't clear on the capital budgeting front, then they would cross out the project. And this was destroying American competitiveness and strategic investment is one you overpay for. That was what my field felt about strategic investments. So we had a lot of dialogue, a lot of conversation, and you know, and through these seminars, I kept hearing about somewhat flexibility, Japanese production systems, but also this thing called modularity. Everybody was about modular designs. And so I was going, well, you know, if flexibility is an optional thing, it's valuable because of the options it brings you. And if modularity is a way of achieving flexibility, then there has to be an options model in there somewhere. And that was where I got to.
All right, I'd like to stay a little bit with that sort of switch to technology and collaboration with Kim Clark that you sort of mentioned there, and your sort of start with work on modularity. So this is really something, I mean, we know you came from the field of real options. So how did you end up settling really on modularity? How did you know that this was sort of your thing that you're gonna continue doing now and continue pushing? Do you have any, from learning that, do you have any advice for other mid-career scholars sort of seeking to do the same thing and sort of trying to make an impact by maybe switching fields, going through that process of change?
I didn't know it. It took a while for me to get there. I knew it was a puzzle. I would worry about it. You know, how do I capture this thing? And there were reasons for it being difficult to do. And being at Harvard Business School, when you're puzzled about something and you want to understand a new set of practices, you write a case. So Kim and I wrote, but with Kim, a case on Sun Microsystems. And what I was mostly fascinated about in that case was a little bit of modularity, but there was a lot of really interesting working capital management stuff going on. Sun was doing what Dell later became famous for. They had a negative cash conversion cycle. And the case was a lot about that, but it was also about some of the strange things they were doing, like designing a chip architecture and basically licensing it out to many people at a very cheap cost. That was the Spark architecture. So I was going with Sun, but I was also, you know, I keep coming back to how do you model this modular system, because Sun was creating, the Spark architecture was a module in Sun's greater business model. So they were thinking in a mix and match kind of way. but it was all very inchoate. And then I had first one and then another very big moment. One was on the Mass Pike, coming out to where I am now, Stockbridge. And I was thinking about the model and saying, the issue was that I needed to be able to split a distribution and add up the pieces that would be the modules. So splitting and substitution are the very two most basic modular operators. And you have to model it, and it struck me in the car that, well, the only distribution that behaves well under, addition is the normal distribution. And I said to myself, I was working with uniform distributions, which I found easier, and they were very interesting. They got very bad when you tried to add across uniform distributions. So, because of course they become normal eventually. So I said, well, if it wants to be normal, let's make it normal, and not log normal, which is financial option theory, but normal. So I got here to this house, and my poor family, I just disappeared for the weekend. And by the end of the weekend, I had a tractable model and a numerical example. And it said that a reasonably sized modularization of going from one integrated design to 25, which is approximately what IBM did in System 360, with optimal levels of experimentation on each module in a symmetric case, would create a value increase of 25 times. And from that point forward, I knew this was my thing. So it was like, hey, as I said to Kim, a 25-time value increase pays for a lot of investment. It also brings about real disruption to an industry structure. So if modularity is and Sun was rolling tanks into their market. And if modularity is this strategic opportunity, then it's a very big one, and IBM is in trouble. So this was approximately 1989, 1990, and IBM was in a lot of trouble. Not from Sun, but from its own PC. But very much from the modularization, the fragmentation of the industry made possible by underlying modularity. So Kim was quite dubious about this. And I had this one project, and he had doctoral students. He had 5 or 6. And I was getting pushback from finance people because I would give seminars based on my model, talking about modularity. And the tradition in finance is to be very dubious about what people tell you. And people would say, well, how do you know there's such thing as a module? I said, well, the engineers see them. And they said, so what? So you believe them? It turns out the engineers don't see the modules very well, often, which is the software track that I went on after Design Rules 1. But I felt unjustified. And then I learned about a technique called design structure matrices that was being pioneered by Steve Eppinger and some other people at MIT. And this was an objective way of tracing a network of task or information flows for a complex artifact. And I said, this is it. This is objective proof that modularity, modules are going to show up as isolated blocks in a DSM. And I took this idea to Kim, and he said, DSMs are the most arcane and nerdy of techniques. And why are you wasting your time on them? The implicit message was no CEO is ever going to look at a DSM. And that's all Harvard cares about, is what CEOs look at. And it is true, no CEO, to my knowledge, has ever looked at a DSM. But I thought I had not only a 25-time value increase to upstart firms, caused by upstart firms, but also an objective way of talking about what a module was, a way that would stand up to the scrutiny of my finance colleagues if they ever cared. And I said to Kim, this was, so he had some amount of time, very doubtful. I said, Kim, this is Cosa Nostra. This is our thing. And he was nice enough not to throw me out.
So I'm like, this has been very fascinating so far. So you basically talked about your sort of two eureka moments, so to speak, when you talk about the DSMs and you talk about sort of 25x sort of value addition. So now, so you're wondering, so you actually went to Kim Clark with these ideas and you're trying to sort of convince him to actually work on these. So we actually know that you sort of wrote a paper together, which actually went to management science, but it kept getting being asked to revision. I think there were 4 rounds of revisions or something like that. And
four rounds of management science lasting 4 years.
Yeah, so that's like a long time. And so then I think you decided to be like, let's sort of not write a paper, let's actually write a book. So our question, sort of what we were interested in knowing is that how did you sort of decide, first of all, okay, let's turn this paper into actual book. And so what was this process like? There must be a lot of challenges. And so we were interested in knowing, so what happened in this journey to actually put your ideas in an actual book form and sort of leading up to the publication. So really talking about the 90s, when you're convinced Kim Clark to work on it, and then you went to publish in 2000.
We're talking 1994 or something. Maybe a little later, maybe 1996 or it was, I have to, so from this vantage point, I have to thank the management science referees, because Connie's laughing, and others I think are grinning too. Our last set of, frankly, I think we got to 4 rounds only because Kim was so eminent that the management science editors didn't want to turn him down flatly. I mean, he was a very big name, is still a very big name in the field, even though he's been doing other things for 20 years. But the last set of reports, each one was different. Each one had a different, it was like Blind Man and the Elephant. Each one had a different take on what the paper was about. Nobody who read the paper understood option theory, even after we tried to explain it somewhat in the paper. One referee wanted us to talk, or the associate editor wanted us to talk about the implications for field service. And I don't know, I could tell you the implications for product design, for new product, field service. No way, I don't know. And they wanted us to shorten the paper by 30%. And I said to Kim, they're not getting, as much as we're trying to explain and ground this in, the actual theory, they don't want, that will go on the cutting, and then they won't understand anything at all. So this is a total non-starter. It's a total impossible. And now with my doctoral students, I was always very sensitive to when are you getting a revise and resubmit that's really a reject, saying, you know, we'll just set the bar so high that any reasonable person will withdraw and we won't have to reject you. So that's a lesson for young scholars. I said, we have to write a book. And between approximately 1996 and, no, so this was between 1994 and 1996-ish, I did write a book, or we wrote a book, but I drafted it. Kim was busy, but he would read chapters and then I went to the ASSA meetings. By then I joined the Mike Jensen's group at Harvard, but he was a quasi-finance person too. But I went to the meetings, and in the course of that Christmas break and the meetings, I reread the whole manuscript. And I wrote to Kim. We didn't really have email then, but when I next saw him, I said, it's not there. It's not, the book doesn't capture what we're trying to say. It's just slipping out through the cracks. And I threw that, I said, we have to start over. And approximately at that time, Kim said, well, I'm going to become dean at the Harvard Business School, but I'll keep working with you. So we started over from scratch. And we had, I said, to prevent the ideas from leaking out through the edges, we had two rules, one of which was everything we said had to be grounded in a real technology. So we spent a long time debating computers versus biology versus automobiles, because Kim was a big automobile fan. And I had no interest in cars whatsoever, and I didn't really give a damn. So we ended up, and we had this case on Sun. I said, you know, computers are it. We're kind of, so that was rule number one. And rule number two, because this was a time, some of you, most of you are too young to remember, there were a ton of biological metaphors in management, especially HBR type management, but also, you know, so everybody was doing, you know, biology metaphors. And I said, rule number two is no metaphors, not one. And the only metaphor I think in Design Rules 2 isn't really ours, it's due to Armin Alshin. And it's about evolution as a grasshopper jumping from point to point, you know, and I just thought it was too nice. And it wasn't our metaphor, it was his. So we let it in the book. So those are the two rules. And they kept us focused, and they made us really go into, we had to assemble our own proof. It wasn't going to be like large number empirical proof. So it had to be examples, but it had to be examples that really, really, really illustrated the points in the theory. So that was, those were the rules, and you know, and so it began.
So just a sort of quick thing before you move on to the next. So just before you published it, what was the sort of feeling like amongst your sort of contemporaries or peers at sort of Harvard Business School? What was sort of the reception to the? Was there any sort of talk around it just before you? None whatsoever. You know, Kim was very good. He would meet with me once or twice a week and go over what we were doing and give, you know, and he read the stuff, and he was very, very thoughtful about it. But
But at the same time, he asked me to become a senior associate dean. So I was the senior associate dean, first of all, of faculty planning, which is recruiting and sort of the way it was defined. It was everything up to the first promotion review. So you're sort of bringing people in at all levels and then, shepherding them through the first few years. And then I became senior associate dean of the doctoral programs after that. So I was completely engaged socially with lots and lots of interesting people across all the fields of management. And I was in Mike Jensen's group, and I was teaching organizations and markets, and very engaged in that as well. Because I moved from finance to Jensen's group because I felt I was going to have to understand agency theory better to say what I wanted to say in book one. And Mike Jensen is a force of nature. So he was having a lot of he and I were sparring a lot, because although he's a force of nature, we have totally different intellectual styles. But he taught me a lot. But nobody knew what I was working on with Kim. Everybody knew I was working with the dean on a book project. But no one, I said to Kim one day, as the book was between submission and publication, there's this gap time. And I said, Kim, in the whole world, because when you write a book, the first advice people give you is, who is your audience? Be sure to define your audience. Make sure you write for an audience. And I said, Kim, in the whole world, there is not a single person who wants to read this book. It's like, in my own metaphor was, the medieval painters who would do a beautiful painting on the back of what was going to be shown to the public. I felt we were doing a painting on the back of an altar or something, and that it had no justification other than we were doing it. It was I also felt I was like between galaxies. I'd left one galaxy and I was in the very, very dark places of the universe trying to find another galaxy. But there I was betwixt, and who knew how long the journey was going to take, or if there even was another galaxy out there. Anyway, so it was a very strange time, intellectually and also professionally.
Yeah, I can imagine. It definitely found its audience now, and I think we're all very happy you stuck with it during that process. But it's super interesting to hear that it was actually, like, at that time a more difficult thing than now, looking back at a very successful book. Makes it seem to be. The book. And
yeah. I was, in a way, just as I thank the referees of management science for putting me on an uncomfortable path, I was also lucky. So at that point, and I was still relatively young and able to change fields, the field of real options was going exactly. I hope nobody out there is a real options person, because I'm sort of in that community still. I felt it was going nowhere. It was getting more arcane, more difficult, and narrowing in on the tiniest of tiny problems. So there's no attempt to, say something that would matter to anybody but somebody who was trying to justify some very expensive dam project or runway project, or and needed a high-powered very arcane study to be, and was willing to pay for it. So my field was imploding, and that was happening as I was writing design rules too. And so one of the things I jettisoned was option theory in the sense of Mertonian option theory, because there was a big conflict then between dynamic programming and option theory was supposed to give you the right discount rate or discount flows the right way. And dynamic programming just used the interest rate, and that was somehow, this was a debate that made no sense. And the other problem is that the theory I was dragging around is based on dynamic stochastic processes that are very close to what happens in the stock market, where things are being traded, minute by minute. In what I was talking about, which was new products, there's no process, there's no observable dynamic stochastic process. So you might as well just get rid of it, which simplifies the model greatly. And, and hardly anybody reads that part anyway. So that, in a way, was lucky that my field, the field I started in, was so obviously stuck, and that I wasn't going to unstick it. Because life is long, and most people find some time where they, the work they've been doing is not what they want to be doing. And for me, it was so clear I had to do something else that I really had no choice.
Right. And then you made this very clear switch, and especially after publishing the book, right? You basically left finance more or less completely behind and shifted to technology, to sort of multiple new topics. Maybe it would be really interesting to know sort of a little bit more about how this time of transition played out for you. Is there something you can tell us about?
So remember, the other thing, so Design Rules 1 was published on March 6, 2001. No, March 6, 2000, sorry. That was the day the internet bubble began to break. That was the high point of the NASDAQ, was that day. They burned in my memory because we then watched the market drop. And this was, and then following the dot-com crash, there were all these scandals of, Enron and abuses of basically what Mike Jensen had been recommending as the right way to organize a company for about 10 years. So I mean, all these cases where high-powered incentives caused executives to do terrible things. So Mike actually changed his whole view of the world based on that crash, based on the aftermath, the accounting scandals, the Enron scandal, all of, and he just changed his view. Stopped preaching high-powered incentives, started preaching integrity. I also was, so I was an efficient markets person. Design Rules 1 is based on the theory of efficient markets, that the price, the value as revealed by the market is the right value. And Bob Merton was really good at explaining why, even though it appeared that the market was wrong, that it really hadn't been, and that there was just new information that came in. But I kind of lost my faith. I'd always had great faith in market prices, and it just got, the weight of the evidence for me became overwhelming. And also, as I thought, from a technological point of view, what information would the market need to process to really get those prices right? I say that just was not in the realm of possibility, could not happen. So all this notion of, it was an early version of crowdsourcing, all this notion that the disparate pieces of information aggregate to something correct or something more correct than any one piece, which is kind of what we believed in finance. I just said, it's not, it doesn't aggregate that way. Real technologies don't aggregate, they get combined, and they're not going to add up to anything sensible. So then I was at sea for quite a while.
And then you joined some new sort of communities, collaborated with some new people. How did you find those? How did you find your new topics?
Well, it was a godsend. There were people who, so there were both academics and also practitioners, computer scientists mainly, who got design rules and were excited by it. And a number of them reached out. So I was writing like short translations of the main messages in design rules, because it's a long book. And so I was trying to, simplify the gospel, as it were. At one point, really very soon after Design Rules was published, I was giving a talk at the one of the big hotels in Boston, and Eric von Hippel introduced himself, came up afterwards. And I have to say, this was a talk to a bunch of managers who had no interest and no understanding of what I was saying, and I was not reaching them. But Eric introduced himself, and I knew who he was, and he began inviting me to workshops and conferences, and I learned about open source. So because this was so early 2000s, this was when Linux was, the penguin was going everywhere, and everybody was like, gee, wow, what is going on? And I said, if my theory is any good, modularity should explain something about why this open source model functions. So that created and then Masa Aoki, who's a game theorist from Stanford and Japan, invited me to a big conference in Paris. And I said, I want to write about transactions, because one of the things that I didn't explain in DR1 was why transactions would go at certain places in a task network. And in my field, management strategy, this idea of a task network didn't exist. Why would you care about a task network? And the closest we got was Porter and Nicholas Sigelco, and they would do value networks, but down at the level. So anyway, so for that conference, I wrote the first draft of what became the transactions paper. Where do transactions come from? So little by little, Michael Jacobides and Sid Winter were at Wharton. They invited me to give a talk, actually before the book was published. And Michael was doing stuff on mortgage banking and the fragmentation of the industry. And Sid, of course, is industry evolution. And I say, this fragmentation you're seeing in mortgage banking is exactly like the fragmentation you see in computers. They're dividing up the tasks into the component parts and creating contractual interfaces between them. So Michael was doing industry architecture. He came and was a visiting scholar a couple of times. So little by little, I wrote for the first Journal of Organization Design issue because of Mike Tushman, who is a colleague, a paper called Organization Design for Business Ecosystems. And so I had a very early paper with ecosystems in the title, and that gave me some credibility in the ecosystems field. And Annabelle Gavert, who was a doctoral student of Michael Cusumano and Rebecca Henderson at MIT, and read design rules and so she was doing platform leadership, and she got together she had the idea of an edited volume and created a conference and an opportunity to publish something on platforms. And I said, well, platforms are just like, they're like the center of a bunch of options. They're anyway. So Jason Woodard, a doctoral student, and I wrote the architecture of platforms for that book. So, just little by little, inch by inch, hardly anything got into a referee journal. Practically one or two things. So, anyway, so next thing I knew, I was totally busy, had several communities that I was welcome in. And those are still my communities.
So this is actually great. So you talk about the communities, so new communities, you sort of met, new people you met after 2000. So I'm like, we just sort of interested to know, because also you're kind of learning a new language as well. So you're really moving away from one to another. So we just want to know, so kind of what has changed in the last 2 decades? And we know now you're actually sort of finishing up the sort of second volume of design rules. And we know that your research has sort of played a major role in sort of deciding sort of this field, the management and innovation, where that's going. So how do you see your sort of academic legacy, the past 2 decades, if you have to look at it broadly from a perspective?
First on learning the new language. So I told you I was very arrogant as a young scholar. One of the things I was arrogant about was I didn't even know the field organization design existed. And I didn't want to study organizational behavior. And no one I respected at that time thought in any event. So I started trying to write for more management-oriented journals. And suddenly I'm getting all these questions about James Thompson. It's like, who's he? And there were other people like Perot, Charles Perot, and who's he? So it was, in order to communicate with these new people, Eric I knew, and I knew I came to know a lot about user innovation, a lot about open source, but these classic management of organizations and just, I didn't know about it, and that made me by their standards ignorant and not worth talking to. Now, I was lucky that, what do you call it? The economy was moving in my direction. And platforms and ecosystems, which started out as two different things and pretty obscure, next thing you know, and I did not, the whole of Design Rules 1 does not contain the word platform or ecosystem, even though stuff had been published on both. It just didn't, I wanted to call them modular clusters, and I wanted to call the platform design rules. And, but I was perfectly willing to lose that naming battle in order to join a larger army of folks who then got together and became platform and ecosystem scholars. And I learned that classic organization design was very, very hung up on Chandlerian corporations. Really, really didn't think, so there started becoming, this Toby, meta-organizations. People started writing about meta-organizations. And, it became a phenomenon, and managers needed to think that way, needed help in thinking that way. And so a whole bunch of scholars started pursuing the field. But Connie, I didn't know about capabilities, much less dynamic capabilities. I had to learn about them as well. It was wow, there's a lot of stuff out there. Anyway.
Yeah, so no, this is excellent. So we talked about also the language barrier, so to speak. So just the last sort of end for our sort of discussion before we open it to the audience. So what advice do you have for sort of young scholars like us who sort of want to study new problems in this area, given that you've done the last 2 decades sort of been very fertile ground in sort of technology and management?
So first of all, I want to give a plug for DR2, since it's a 6. So I wrote parts of it, but hardly any of it before my sabbatical in 2016. And I've been working, I closed off, I stopped all other collaborations at that time and focused solely on getting the book right. And it's been through a lot of changes, as it's been written. What to say to young scholars? First of all, get tenure. You're not. I've known a lot of people who crashed and burned trying to be too radical too soon, and tenure gives you the space and the latitude to say, yeah, I really, and if your own field is imploding as mine was, then you have to go on to something new and trust in serendipity. So serendipity will bail you out time and time again, and trust in colleagueship. And then in terms of so one of the things that, how to say this, I also watched over many years as large sample empirical work took over many of the fields of management. That was not true when I was a doctoral student. When I was a doctoral student, it was all about theory. You wanted to be a theorist. And then these large sample, and suddenly there's lots and lots of very good work and very exciting work and wonderful work. But it's like the keys under the lamppost. It just excludes so much else that's out there that doesn't lend itself to measurement of that kind, but will lend itself to reasoning and logic and examples and modeling. Be ready. So the best thing Kim taught me, because I was a pie in the sky theorist, was really understand the phenomenon, get close to it, talk to people, but also study the documents, and figure it out. And if you're far away from the phenomenon, then you can do these pretty models and you'll be celebrated by economists and sometimes management scholars. Although I think management scholars have more discernment about what's actually real. You know, but I've seen so many people so many people kind of rise up in terms of lots of excitement about their work, but because it's not close to reality, it never goes anywhere. In fact, now it's you know, I can look at stuff and say, I don't need to worry about that because it won't get traction. Anyway, that's all my advice.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's actually excellent advice. We sort of taken it to heart during the session. So I would just sort of like to open the floor up to the audience. If there are any questions that you would like to ask, we could take a couple of questions.
You can all unmute yourself.
Yeah, just unmute yourself or raise your hand and then just ask your question.
Carliss, let me ask one question.
Alfonso.
Alfonso here, hi. So first, congratulations for this award. I mean, this is super well deserved. One question I have is this. You mentioned, just passing by your links to ERIC, user innovation, and what I am curious is, how did you make the link between modularity and user innovations and open source? I mean, you also had this work with Joachim Henkel and so on and so forth. So this is, if you want, is just a curiosity, but how did you make the link between modularity and open source and user innovation?
I mean, so for me, it seemed transparently obvious that people, you know, pure economic logic, people would do things for their own benefit. And if it didn't cost them anything, they shouldn't care if other people got the benefit of it. So then we get to we get to very cheap communication and non-rivalry. And that if more than one person started doing it and they had kind of a common ground, that's how you could build software that way. And that was that. So the architecture of participation was written for a conference in 2003. And I wanted to say, you know, if you can divide it up, i.e. modularize it, and everybody wants their own piece, and there's, you know, they don't all want the same piece, each of them wants a different piece, and they work on what they want, and what they intend to use, their favorite feature, then you're going to get a code base. And so that was that model. What I didn't understand then is that transparency was really important. The openness of open source, which is different from is very, very important. But that's the story for another day. So that was the connection. I said, yeah, people, you know, I cook for my own benefit, and I will share a recipe because if someone else uses my recipe, that's just fine. So truly, that was my personal metaphor for open source. Was a I don't know. This is a very American thing, but churches, often the ladies will create a cookbook. I say ladies, but now men and ladies, but they create and disseminate a cookbook where everybody gives their recipe. So that was my homing model of open source, was everybody doing their own thing and contributing their recipes to a cookbook.
Yes, I think that we have time only for one question. So if someone else has a question, otherwise I will ask a very quick one. Okay, so let me ask. So this was so first of all, thank you. So this was very intense and dense as a conversation. So I learned a lot. So my question is, what is next? So what is this? Where is this journey taking you next? What is your next project?
Oh, I'm just going to finish Design Rules 2. You know, it's 6 years and it's not done. It's getting close. The chapters are posted. If you get an email from me, you get a link, and they're also on SSRN and ResearchGate. I'm gonna crawl across the finish line, I hope. And read other people's work a lot. So that I don't have a project, Miriam.
So we can use you as a friendly reviewer, say. So we can send you our stuff and ask you.
Yes. To a point, but to a point.
Just kidding.
No. It's fine, and I'm interested, and in particular, I'm just hoping people will react to design rules too. I mean, it's an attempt to. Okay, so I'm gonna be. I don't think there's a good theory of technology out there. This is an attempt. I mean, we have general purpose technologies, we have disruptive, we have a lot of categorical theories. This is an attempt to offer a true general theory of technology and its interaction with organizations. How they respond, and it's I'm hoping, I'm praying that people will find some of these ideas useful, and then I'm really happy to read stuff that builds on this work. But it might go nowhere. It might be like that cathedral painter who painted a whole painting for nobody.
I think we're all very excited to read that, to read Design Rules 2. Very much looking forward to that. Let me just wrap up really quick. I would like to thank all of you here for your questions and participation in this session. It was awesome. Thank you so much for tuning in, making this a success. Navya and I would both like to extend our gratitude to Miriam, Gabriel, and Wesley for giving us this opportunity to talk to Carliss and have this interview now. And of course, a big, huge thank you for Carliss for giving us her time, meeting and talking to us both before this and now to us all during this amazing session. Carliss, really, your input was super valuable. We've learned a lot from you. Very excited for Design Rules 2. Maybe, is there any other updates? Is there anything you want to say before we close this session?
I'd just like to, thank you all as my friends, and for your listening and for your attention, and I wish I could speak out personally to all of you who are here. But I know we're out of time, so just want to say so glad to see you all.
So thank you, Carliss.
And I will see many of you in your sessions later in the SMS conference.
And we will see you in your sessions.
Right.
Sessions coming up as well.
Yeah, yes.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Carliss.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.